Pray audacious prayers. Pray audaciously. That's the word turns, but that's okay. Think about that. Have you ever prayed an audacious prayer? Do you know anyone actually who just seems to always pray boldly? Why do you think that person can pray so boldly? When Martin Luther's co-worker became ill, the reformer prayed boldly for healing. And I quote, "I besought the Almighty with great vigor. I attacked him with his own weapons, quoting from Scripture all the promises I could remember that prayers should be granted, and said that he must grant my prayer if I was henceforth to put faith in his promises." Whew. It's like getting up in God's face and getting kind of personal. On another occasion, and I remember reading about this in a church history class, Martin Luther's good friend Frederick Myconius was gravely ill. Luther wrote to him and said, "I command thee in the name of God to live, because I still have need of thee in the work of reforming the church. The Lord will never let me hear that thou art dead, but will permit thee to survive me. For this I am praying, this is my will, and may my will be done, because I seek only to glorify the name of God." That's an audacious prayer. As John Wesley was crossing the Atlantic Ocean, contrary winds came up. He was reading in his cabin when he became aware of some confusion on board. When he learned that the winds were knocking the ship off course, he responded in prayer. Adam Clark, a colleague of Wesley's, heard the prayer and recorded it for posterity. Here's what Wesley prayed. "Almighty and everlasting God, thou hast sway everywhere, and all things serve the purpose of thy will. Thou holdest the winds in thy fists, and sittest upon the water floods, and reignest a king forever. Command these winds and these waves that they obey thee, and take us speedily and safely to the haven whither we would go." Wesley stood up from his knees, took up his book, and continued to read. Dr. Clark went on deck, where he found calm winds and the ship back on course. But Wesley made no remark about the answered prayer. Adam Clark would later write, "So fully did he expect to be heard that he took it for granted that he was heard." How bold are your prayers? How bold are your prayers? Boldness in prayer is kind of an uncomfortable thought for a lot of us. We think of speaking softly to God. We talk of humbling ourselves before God, having a chat with God, but agonizing before God, storming heaven with your prayers, pounding on the door of the Most High, wrestling with God in prayer. Is such prayer irreverent? Is such prayer presumptuous? Well, it would be if God had not invited us to pray that way anyway. Hebrews 4:16. "So let us come boldly to the very throne of God and stay there to receive His mercy and to find grace to help us in our times of need." Bold. Joshua did this. But not before he didn't do this. Joshua, his prayer life teaches us what happens when we don't pray as much as it teaches us how to pray. Last week we were in Shechem. Children of Israel went on a 20-mile hike. They lined up both sides of the valley, and they proclaimed the promises and the curses of God back and forth in an antiphonal response. They returned back to their camp at Gilgal following that, and there they were. And one day, a group of strangers wanders into their camp. The strangers approach Joshua and they say, "We have come from a very faraway country." They presented themselves as hapless pilgrims from this distant land. At first glance, everything seemed to fit their description, their story. The grain sacks that they carried, their sandals, the clothes, all of these were worn out from showing excessive wear over a long time coming. And so their bread that they had was very dry and moldy. I mean, everything just seemed to fit their story that they came from a very distant land. They also claimed to be allies to the Hebrews, to the children of God. They praised the accomplishments of God. They asked Joshua and his men to make a covenant with them. Joshua weighed the options, and the rulers of Israel finally agreed and said, "We would be happy to honor you." But there was a little questioning. But in the end, they all came to a consensus and agreed that, yes, we will definitely make a treaty with you. 3 days. 3 days passed before Joshua realized that he and the children of Israel had been hoodwinked. These people were not from some distant land as they had proclaimed. Instead, they were from Gibeon, a single day's walk away from Gilgal. Their weather clothing was a disguise. They pretended to be foreigners because they knew that the Hebrews had just recently conquered Jericho and Ai and completely destroyed all the people. And they didn't want to be next on the chopping block. They might have also been made aware of God's laws, which had made special provision for cities outside of the land of Canaan. Now this one was different because this one was in the land of Canaan. It was in the promised land. It was one of those cities that had been marked for destruction. But cities outside of Canaan, God had said back in Deuteronomy chapter 20 that any city, as they approached it, if they would come to terms and make peace with them, that they would be spared. So being afraid, these Gibeonites resorted to this deception to save their own necks. So why didn't Joshua and the elders detect the ruse? We find the answer in Joshua chapter 9, verse 14. They did not ask the counsel of the Lord. They did not ask the counsel of the Lord. They didn't pray. They acted in their own volition. They used their own wisdom, their own clever thinking to think, "Oh, well, great, this won't be a problem." It became a problem. In fact, the practice up to this point for the Hebrews as they entered the promised land was basically to pray first and act later. In fact, back in Numbers chapter 27, verse 21, Joshua was told to stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire before the Lord, and this is how the community of Israel will determine everything they should do. Stand before the priest, inquire of the Lord, and this is how you will determine what it is that God wants you to do. Hey, there's some great advice right there. Go before God in prayer, seek His will if you want to know what you need to do. In other words, pray first, act second. How many of you have reversed that? Oh, God bless our screw up. I should have done you first. Yeah, but here we are in this mess. The things that we do sometimes, I'm like, what were we thinking? It's just it. We weren't. We didn't put God first. Well, Joshua failed to do this. He and his council entered into this alliance with the enemy because they did not seek the counsel of God. We do well to learn from his mistake. Because our enemy, Satan, loves to wear disguises. He comes into our camp. In fact, in 2 Corinthians 11:14, it says, Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. He's crafty. That's why it's essential that we consult God in everything. Nothing is off limits. Always consult God. Immediately, quickly, live with one ear toward heaven and keep the line always open to God. God, is this opportunity really from you? God, are you in this venture? God, should I take this road or that road? At every decision, at every crossroad, acknowledge Him, heed Him, and ask Him, do I turn right or left? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding, as Joshua did. Instead, in all your ways, acknowledge Him, seek Him, and He will direct your paths. Our relationship with God is just like that. It's a relationship, first and foremost. And His invitation is very clear, very simple. Psalm 27, verse 8. Oh, my people, come and talk with me. And our response, later in that same verse, Lord, I am coming. We're invited to come. Our response should be, yes, I'm coming. When we abide with Him, He abides with us. And He grants us wisdom when we need it. As we abide with Him, He will help us against Satan. He will disclose the craftiness of Satan. But we must regularly consult Him in everything. Always. Psalm 119, 105. His word is a lamp unto our feet. A lamp, especially in the context in which this was spoken, is not a very bright light. When it talks about being a lamp unto your feet, it's like maybe lighting or illuminating about 2 or 3 steps in front of you at the most. In other words, this isn't a searchlight. It's not a spotlight. Sometimes all we get is just that next step that we have clarity on. And it's a way of God saying, I'm testing your obedience. Are you willing to take that step, not knowing for sure where the next step's going to be? Now I want you to go over here. Are you willing to follow in obedience that next step? Glory days become glory days when we learn to hear God's voice telling us to turn this way or that way. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21 contains this beautiful promise. I love this. This is out of the New Living Translation. Your own ears will hear Him. Right behind you, a voice will say, this is the way you should go, whether to the right or to the left. You hear that? God will speak to us. He will give us clarity. He gives us that clear direction of whether to go to the right or left if we are in tune with Him, if we are seeking His will. Refer every decision you make to the tribunal of heaven. Like David, you can ask God to bend low and hear my whispered plea, Psalm 31:2. Wait until God speaks before you act. Be patient. Monitor your impulse, Lord. That's where we get into trouble. We surge ahead. God, you're not working fast enough. Come on, keep up. As soon as we charge ahead, if you start to feel a check in your heart, pay attention to it. Ask God again. It's the only way to outwit the devil's deceit. Consult God in everything and call on God for great things. Eventually, that's exactly what Joshua did. He learned his lesson. The alliance that he made with the Gibeonites would soon prove to be troublesome. Because here's what happened. The other kings, the other communities, so to speak, in the Promised Land felt like the Gibeonites had just betrayed them. So they banded together, 5 kings in all, 5 armies, and decided we're going to wipe out the Gibeonites for being traitors, for siding with the Hebrews, with the children of Israel. The Gibeonites were greatly outnumbered, but since they had made this alliance with Joshua, they asked the Hebrews to help. And because Joshua had given them his word, he had no choice but to come to their rescue. Joshua chapter 10, verses 7 through 9. So Joshua ascended from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, I love this. Man, I wish we got these kind of confirmations all the time. Do not fear them, for I have delivered them into your hand. Not a man of them shall stand before you. Joshua therefore came upon them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal. These 5 kings never stood a chance. Apparently, they didn't expect Joshua to respond with such fervor and urgency. They turned and ran with the Hebrews hot on the trails. And as Joshua's army thundered behind them, the clouds above them began to thunder. In fact, it says in verse 11 that large hailstones fell from the sky in a divine carpet bomb. More died from the hailstones than at the hand of the sword. Joshua saw these hailstones falling, but he was already thinking ahead. He was anticipating the sun setting, and he thought to himself, we need more time. Nightfall would give the enemies that remained a chance to escape and regroup. There were only a few more hours of daylight. If I could just have a few additional hours, then we could win the battle and strike a decisive blow. So he began to pray. You remember what happened last time when he failed to pray. He didn't make that mistake twice. Joshua chapter 10, verses 12 through 15, out of the Message paraphrase. I like this. The day God gave the Amorites up to Israel, Joshua spoke to God with all Israel listening. Now, I want to stop there for just a moment, because one of the things that struck me about this verse is that when Joshua goes before God boldly with this audacious prayer, he's not doing it in isolation. All Israel is listening to his plea. It's a very public prayer. And here's how Eugene Peterson in the Message paraphrase summarizes it. Stop, sun, over Gibeon. Halt, moon, over the Ajalon Valley. And sun stopped. Moon stood stock still until he defeated his enemies. You can find this written in the book of Jashar. The sun stopped in its tracks in mid-sky, just sat there all day. There's never been a day like that before or since. God took orders from a human voice. Truly, God fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal. That's an audacious prayer. It was stunning. It was unprecedented. And the narrator who's recording this story knows that his readers are probably going to be shocked and bewildered. So he refers to the book of Jashar, an extra-biblical volume that contains stories of the Hebrew people. In essence, the narrator is saying, look, if you guys are finding this hard to believe, check it out in the book of Jashar. It's there too. But the verse that deserves our attention is verse 14. And I love the way, this is why I chose this translation, I love the way Eugene Peterson paraphrases it. God took orders from a human voice. God in His divine providence pressed the solar pause button and chose to hear and heed Joshua's request. That begs the question, would He not do something similar for us today? It's not the only time that there was conversation between God and one of His children when God relents or changes His mind. When God was ready to wipe out the children of Israel for all their complaining after they left the promised land and start over with Moses, Moses says, no, Lord, no. If you wipe these people out, our enemies will say, well, you weren't strong enough to deliver them. You got them out of Egypt, but you couldn't bring them into the promised land. And God relented, changed His mind. And here it's as though He's taking orders from a human. Do we ever pray with that kind of audaciousness? That kind of boldness? Do you ever cry out to God with that sense of urgency? Oh God, unless you do this. want to tell you a story about Greg Pruitt, because this is a man who literally believes that God still responds that way in response to our prayers. Greg is a trained engineer, linguist, and Bible translator. But his most significant contribution might be in the area of extreme prayer. In his book by that same name, he relates how he had returned from Guinea, West Africa, to assume the role as president of Pioneer Bible Translators. The year was 2008. We all know what happened in 2008. They were calling it the Great Recession, of sucking dollars out of the economy and confidence out of the public. Well, one of the things that really suffered were charitable organizations, because donations began a free fall to the point that this organization was headed towards insolvency. Now, Greg had no experience in leading an organization like this. He had no tangible place to cut expenses. The resources were few, and the donors were disappearing in droves. Greg knew of only one response: prayer. I quote, he said, "That's when I began to learn not to pray about my strategies, but to make prayer the strategy." Subtle shift, but an important one. I want to stop there for just a moment, because I was asked a question this week. And I wasn't exactly sure how to answer it. But I was asked the question, "Pastor, do you feel like God has given you a vision for this church?" I wasn't sure how to answer that question in a moment. I said, "Well, I kind of hemmed and hawed for a little bit. But I said, I kind of want to be here to see what this church is about. Kind of go through one annual cycle to say, okay, what sort of ministries is this church a part of, and what do they do? Because I know I've already missed some of those things, and there's probably more things coming up." And so I thought, before I start trying to cast any sort of new vision, I want to know what the vision this church has, and what has been its ministry. And the more I thought about that, I kept coming back to this statement. I began to learn not to pray about my strategies, but to make prayer the strategy. I think foundationally for this church moving forward, it's got to start right there. Lori approached me this week asking me what I thought about setting up the prayer room again back there that was during the dinner theater. I said, I would love that. I said, I would love to have kind of like a little, almost call it a prayer chapel, if you will. I challenged her. I said, one thing, I said, we might have to ask Gordon or somebody to make it for us. But I said, I'd love to have a kneeling bench. Someplace where you could just go in there, in quiet and stillness, kneel and pray. Because I said, I think anything that we do moving forward, if it's not bathed in prayer, if that's not first and foremost seeking God and getting His clear direction, then I don't want to be a part of it. Amen. So my vision, one word, prayer. All of us. No exceptions. From the youngest to the oldest. In July that year, Greg wrote a half-page letter to all of his teammates worldwide, calling them to pray. He urged them to stand before God's throne with specific and bold requests. They did. Greg described the results in his book, and I quote, "When I saw the end of the year report, I knew God had heard our prayers. My eyes welled up with tears. If a financial expert were to analyze this graph, he or she would put their finger on the month of July and say, 'What did you do right here?' Whatever it was, you need to do a lot more of it." I searched in vain for a tangible explanation. I wanted to find trends to explain how it works so that we could do it again, and I never could. I just know God provided. All I had was God and prayer. All I had was God, prayer. Maybe God and prayer is all you have. Like Joshua, you face battles. You have 5 kings bearing down on you today. The kings of discouragement, deception, defeat, destruction, and death. They roar into your world like a Hell's Angels motorcycle gang. Their goal is to chase you back into the wilderness. Don't give them an inch. Respond in prayer. Honest, continual, audacious prayer. You're a member of God's family. You come to God not as a stranger, but as an heir. So confidently, boldly approach His throne. Earnestly make your requests known to Him, not because of what you have achieved, but because of what Christ has done. Jesus spilled His blood for you, so that you could spill your heart before God. In fact, we're going to be celebrating that in just a few moments. We're going to be observing communion, the ordinance of communion, coming to the Lord's table this morning, remembering that Jesus spilled His blood for us. Jesus said, if you have faith, you can tell a mountain to go and jump into the sea and it will happen. So what's your mountain this morning? What is the challenge that you're facing today? Call out to God for help. Is He going to do what you want? I can't say. But I will tell you this. He will do what is best for you. He will. Call on God. Declare the name of Jesus, and when you do, the authority of Christ will make the work of Satan stop in its tracks. Any force that is seeking to drive you out of the promised land will be forced to stop. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened. If you believe, you will get anything you ask for in prayer. That's Matthew 21:22. Yes, it's a battle. But you do not fight in vain. Consult God in all things. Call on Him for great things. And bring some extra sunscreen. You never know. Come on. It'll be a long day. Let's pray.